2 million years ago, at a waterside in East Africa, as a small human reached out to catch a fish, the jaws of a giant crocodile bit into his leg. The teeth of the over 7-meter monster pierced the flesh and crushed the bone, dragging him into the water. This is not imagination. It is evidence of a horrific death experienced by our distant ancestor, found in actual fossils. Homo habilis, a species that lived the shortest and most brutal lives in human history. The average lifespan was only 12 years, with more than half of the fossils showing they died before reaching their teenage years. Considering that today's human average lifespan exceeds 70 years, their lives were 6 times shorter than ours. Why did they have to die so early? Was it because there was no medicine, or was their life itself already touching death? The fossils left by paleontologists answer. On the skull, there were saber-tooth marks, on the limbs traces of crocodile bites, and on various bones the teeth marks of high impacts when left. They were literally prey, the lowest in the ecosystem. Today is the story of the most unfortunate species in human history, Homo habilis. Let's follow the journey of miraculous survival for 650,000 years, despite the terrifying predators they faced and the extreme environments. Homo habilis is an early human species that lived on the African continent from about 2,300,000 years ago to 1,050,000 years ago. The name means handy person because they could make simple stone tools. However, their skill with tools did not greatly aid their survival. The reason was simple. It was because their bodies were too weak. The average height was about 1.2 meters, approximately 30% smaller than modern humans, and their weight was only about 60% of today's. Moreover, their skeletons were very fragile, making bones easily break from minor impacts and difficult to recover once injured. Their body structure was closer to an intermediate form between chimpanzees and humans. Their limbs were relatively long, and their hands and feet were designed for climbing trees well. In fact, they spent most of their time in trees to avoid predators. Chimpanzees often fall from trees and suffer serious injuries at least once in their lifetime, and it is presumed that Homo habilis was no different. However, the safety in the trees was only temporary, because they were not vegetarians. Surprisingly, Homo habilis was a species with a very high meat consumption rate among early humans. The teeth and jawbones left in the fossils, evidence of this. Large and thick front teeth and a strong jaw structure were developed to tear and chew tough meat. The problem was the way they obtained meat. Homo habilis was not strong enough to hunt directly. With their small bodies, weak muscles, and poor tool, it was insufficient to catch large animals, so the survival method they chose was different. Becoming scavengers rather than hunters, they would search for carcasses left by other predators and eat the remaining meat. This strategy led to fatal consequences. According to one study, Homo habilis could at best only deal with jackals or cheetahs. They were helpless when larger predators appeared. Unfortunately, at that time, there were an enormous number of large predators living in East Africa and South Africa. These predators not only competed for carcasses, but also considered Homo habilis itself as prey. One of the most threatening predators was the saber-tooth, known as Megantherium. It was about the size of a jaguar, but much heavier and more powerful. It had legs the size of a lion's, and its claws were as sharp as razors. Once caught by its claws, there was no escape as 2 massive fangs pierced the throat, severing major arteries. There was an even more gruesome method of killing. In one Homo habilis fossil, fang marks were found on the back of the head, and analysis of the bite angle revealed a surprising fact. The attack came from the front, not from behind. In other words, it means that the Megantherium put the entire human head in its mouth and bit down. This not only caused direct damage to the skull and brain, but also completely blocked the nose and mouth with its jaws, leading to suffocation. Carbon isotope analysis revealed that Megatherium frequenterie et Homo habilis. It preferred primitive humans over any other prey. To them, our ancestors were tasty snack. It was not only the megapiran, there was also another saber-toothed cat called Dinophiles, and large cats like Homotherium and Meteorotus were lurking, especially Meteorotus, one of the largest felines in history, with some individuals weighing over 400 kilograms. They were similar in size to male polar bears. With a size like this, it could kill a person with just one swipe of its paw. Farouz's hunting method was particularly lethal. Despite its massive body, its short legs made long chases impossible. Instead, it utilized its remarkable jumping ability. It could jump higher and farther than any other felid, and, thanks to that, escaping to the trees was almost impossible. Macus was a predator that could chase up to the trees. On the other hand, Omotrium instilled fear in a completely different way. The canines were short but wide, and the tips were roughly serrated like a saw. This allowed them to tear flesh and cause bleeding with a single bite, leading to a quick death. It wasn't only the giant cats that were threatening. Hyenas were also a nightmare for Homo habilis. Among them, the species called Pachycocuta was particularly terrifying. It was one of the largest hyenas in history, as big as a lion. However, the real fear was not its size, it was its biting power. Pachycocuta is estimated to have had the strongest jaws among terrestrial mammals. This powerful jaw was strong enough to crush bones. Thanks to this, they could eat the marrow that other animals couldn't, so Pachycocuta could obtain nutrients even from carcasses left by other predators. The prey that Homo habilis found with difficulty was just easy food for them to snatch away. Moreover, they moved in packs. In the face of their overwhelming numbers, there was little Homo habilis could do. There was also a smaller, but in some ways more terrifying hyena. It was a species called Cartmapartites, a hyena with a form similar to a dog. More agile and nimble, they roamed the wide plains hunting. The problem was their speed. Their leg structure was very similar to that of a cheetah. They were nicknamed the running hyena. Homo habilis was not an excellent runner. At best, they could manage some endurance running. They could not keep up with the speed of the cosmophy. Moreover, Cisaena was a hypercarnivore, obtaining more than 70% of its calories from meat, and surprisingly, it had sharp teeth resembling those of a big cat. However, there was something more terrifying than the predators on land. It was the giant crocodiles lurking in the water. As mentioned earlier, Homo habilis liked fish. However, they had neither fishing rods nor spears. They tried to catch with their bare hands. In the end, that action was no different from signaling to be eaten by a crocodile. The most dangerous crocodile at that time was Crocodilus anthropophagus. It means man-eater. Literally, it was a crocodile that enjoyed eating humans. Fossil evidence actually supports this. 2 young Homo habilis discovered at an archaeological site had severe damage on their legs and feet, and the marks matched exactly with crocodile teeth marks. Their hunting method was typical of the crocodiles we know. They would ambush by the water's edge, bite the legs, drag them into the water to drown them, or spin the body to tear off limbs. These brutal scenes were not just imagined, but were confirmed by actual fossil evidence. Garundum, ori. Anthropophagus was covered with very sturdy, armor-like scales and was much larger than the typical saltwater crocodile. Adults reached a length of 7.5 meters and weighed about 1.5 tons compared to Along, the longest recorded crocodile, at 6 meters and about 1.1 tons. Anthropophagus was much larger. If bitten by a crocodile of this size, one would inevitably lose their life instantly. Moreover, with two horns above its eyes, it would have appeared very threatening visually. Predators were not the only problem. Due to the diet and lifestyle of Homo habilis, they frequently encountered various herbivores and omnivores. Prehistoric rhinoceroses, hippos, giant boars, elephants, and giraffes. They didn't eat meat, but a single collision could be fatal, so they were just as dangerous. Even today in Africa, herbivores and omnivores claim thousands of lives each year. 2 million years ago, this danger would have been much greater, especially when approaching the water's edge to clean carcasses or catch fish. There was a high possibility of encountering hippos or rhinos. Despite all these dangers, there was something else that troubled Homo habilis. It was their dental problems. According to research, out of the 26 fossils found, only 4 out of 10 individuals had proper teeth. The rest mostly had worn down, broken, or cracked teeth. The most surprising thing is that this problem started at a very young age. The oldest specimen was only 25 years old, and even individuals under 10 were already experiencing serious dental problems. One individual, who was 17, had dental conditions twice as bad as those of a modern elderly person. This dental damage was due to their eating habits. Homo habilis scavenged carcasses left by other animals. As a result, they had to chew bones or tough muscle tissues. Sometimes they also had to eat hard plant stems or roots. Since they couldn't hunt for themselves, they didn't have the luxury of choosing the best parts to eat. Ultimately, this diet placed a tremendous burden on their teeth. The climate also made their lives even more difficult. Homo habilis lived. During this period, Africa experienced severe climate change. The weather became increasingly colder, and as the land dried up, food became significantly scarce. As food became scarce, they had to rely more on meat left by other animals. This led to more deaths. As food decreased, encounters with predators became much more frequent. The entire food chain became unstable, and predators became increasingly aggressive. Competition intensified, bringing another threat to Homo habilis. It was from the same humans or close relatives. The remains of Homo habilis were found alongside 3 other Homo species and 1 hominin species. They were Homo erectus, Homo rudolfensis, and Paranthropus boisei. The relationship between them was not simply coexistence. Sometimes it ended in violence. In fact, a Paranthropus fossil showed evidence of being attacked by Homo habilis. Some researchers suggest that he might not only have been killed, but also eaten. However, in confrontations with other Homo species, Homo habilis was at a significant disadvantage. First of all, they were the smallest species at the time and were not adapted to terrestrial life. Above all, their brain size was too small. Their brains, which were more than 1/4 smaller compared to other Homo species, likely had limitations in complex thinking or strategizing. Ultimately, the difference in intelligence led to a difference in survival ability. Especially when compared to Homo erectus, the difference becomes much more pronounced. Research results show that some erectus brains were twice as large as those of Homo habilis. This enormous difference was not just a matter of size, but led to a gap in intelligence and technological capability. Homo erectus could control fire and make picks, knives, and axes. This would have been very advantageous in a fight. Homo habilis could only make the most basic stone tools. Among the primates, there was also a giant baboon called Therapithecus. It was similar to today's baboons, but much larger and stronger. Its canines were long and sharp, and its muscular body was 3 times the size of Homo habilis. They didn't hunt, but they had enough strength to kill a person. Therefore, scientists also consider this giant baboon a potential threat to Homo habilis. Personally, as I organize all these stories, I can't even imagine how Homo habilis managed to survive day by day. When they woke up in the morning, they had to come down from the trees, and when they went out to the plains to find food, all sorts of predators would have been lurking and waiting. When they went to the water's edge to catch fish, there were giant crocodiles, and when they searched for carcasses, there were saber-toothed cats larger than lions and packs of hyenas waiting. According to research, the most dangerous time for Homo habilis was around the age of 10. From this age, the probability of death increased sharply. However, in fact, surviving until the age of 10 was a miracle in itself. More than half of the entire population died before that age, and including newborns, 6 out of 10 died before reaching adulthood. In this light, it is possible that the actual average lifespan was even shorter than 12 years. This raises the question: how could Homo habilis survive for as long as 650,000 years in such a dreadful environment? Perhaps the secret to their survival lay in their skills. Although simple, stone tools allowed them to access bone marrow or tough plant fibers. Additionally, traces of windbreak forests and rough huts dating back about 1,700,000 years have been discovered, suggesting that these structures were likely built by Homo habilis. In other words, they found ways to protect themselves even as the climate became increasingly harsh. Another survival secret was the power of numbers. Researchers estimate that Homo habilis lived in groups of up to 85 individuals. Having more companions meant more eyes and ears were watching the surroundings. Thanks to this communal living, the risk of being caught by predators would have been reduced, and they could have fought or fled together when danger approached. But honestly, considering everything, their survival was close to a miracle. Despite the extremely high mortality rate, they endured for hundreds of thousands of years without going extinct. Perhaps their birth rate was very high. Many individuals died, but even more were born. The story of Homo habilis we explore today is not merely an ancient tragedy. It is also evidence of where our humanity began and what pain and trials we endured to reach our current state. The 12 years as the average lifespan is not just a simple statistic. It signifies the pain that countless lives had to fight against daily and the desperate will to survive. We, living in modern times, enjoy an average lifespan of 73 years. This is thanks to advancements in medicine, safe living environments, and the availability of food and sanitation. There is no worry about being eaten by predators, falling from trees and getting injured, or being bitten by a crocodile while catching fish with bare hands. This life feels natural, but looking at the entire 2,800,000 years of human history, the life we have now is a privilege that has only become possible very recently. Homo habilis eventually disappeared about 1,650,000 years ago. The exact reason for extinction has not been revealed, but it is likely that climate change and competition with other human species played a role. Homo erectus, which appeared later, was bigger, stronger, and smarter. They handled fire, made more sophisticated tools, and adapted to the environment. Eventually, the small and weak Homo habilis gradually lost their place and quietly disappeared from the stage of history. However, they did not completely vanish. Homo habilis may not be our direct ancestors, but they hold a very important position in the flow of human evolution. They were among the earliest humans to use stone tools and were also the first species to begin eating meat in earnest. Although they mainly ate meat left by other predators rather than hunting, the protein obtained from it promoted brain growth, serving as an important foundation for later humans to evolve with higher intelligence. Reflecting on their short and brutal lives, we realize how vulnerable yet persistent the human species was. Even amidst all the unfavorable conditions and extremely high mortality rates, they did not give up. Those who survived and gave birth to the next generation continued to pass on to the following generations. Even if we develop further and live longer in the future, the stories of ancestors like Homo habilis are worth remembering. Without their pain and struggle, we would not exist today. Today was the story of Homo habilis, one of the most challenging and persistent species in human history.
Do you think we should bring the woolly mammoth back to life, or should something stay in the past? Let me know in the comments. We are on a mission to uncover every hidden chapter of our ancient past. Join our community of explorers by subscribing, and let's reach 1,000 together.